President Nelson, my fellow Americans, I stand before you tonight humbly grateful to God for the blessings we all enjoy as citizens of these great United States of America. I am grateful for our founding fathers who were raised up with the courage to give their lives, with the unselfishness to give their fortunes, and the vision to pledge their sacred honor in order to establish a new kind of government of their own choosing, be free. I'm additionally grateful that these founding fathers had the faith and humility to accept the divine inspiration so necessary in setting forth a Constitution as the foundation for their new republic. I am honored with the privilege of addressing you tonight on the vital subject of the proper role of government. Men in the public spotlight constantly are asked to express an opinion on a myriad of government proposals and projects. What do you think of TVA? What is your opinion of Medicare? How do you feel about urban renewal? The list is endless. All too often answers to these questions seem to be based not upon any solid principle, but upon the popularity of the specific government program in question. Seldom are men willing to oppose a popular program if they themselves wish to be popular, especially if they seek public office. Such an approach to vital political questions of the day can only lead to public confusion and legislative chaos. Decisions of this nature should be based upon and measured against certain basic principles regarding the proper role of government. If principles are correct, then they can be applied to any specific proposal with confidence. Are there not, in reality, underlying universal principles with reference to which all issues must be resolved, whether the society be simple or complex in its mechanical organization? It seems to me we could relieve ourselves of most of the bewilderment which so unsettles and distracts us by subjecting each situation to the simple test of right and wrong. Right and wrong as moral principles do not change. They are actual and reliable determinants, whether the situation with which we deal is simple or complicated. There is always a right and a wrong to every question which requires our solution. Unlike the political opportunist, the true statesman values principle above popularity and works to create popularity for those political principles which are wise and just. I should like to outline in clear, concise, and straightforward terms the political principles to which I subscribe. These are the guidelines which determine now and in the future my attitudes and actions toward all domestic proposals and projects of government. These are the principles which, in my opinion, proclaim the proper role of government in the domestic affairs of the nation. I believe that governments were instituted of God for the benefit of man, and accountable for their acts in relation to them, both in making laws and administering them for the good and safety of society. I believe that no government can exist in peace except such laws are framed and held inviolate as will secure to each individual the free exercise of conscience, the right and control of property, and the protection of life. I believe that all men are bound to sustain and uphold the respective governments in which they reside, while protected in their inherent and inalienable rights by the laws of such governments, and that sedition and rebellion are unbecoming every citizen thus protected and should be punished accordingly, and that all governments have a right to enact such laws as in their own judgments are best calculated to secure the public interest, at the same time, however, holding sacred the freedom of conscience. It is generally agreed that the most important single function of government is to secure the rights and freedoms of the individual citizens. But what are those rights? And what is their source? Until these questions are answered, there is little likelihood that we can correctly determine how government can best secure them. Thomas Paine, back in the days of the American Revolution, explained that rights are not gifts from one man to another, nor from one class of men to another. It is impossible to discover any origin of rights otherwise than in the origin of man. It consequently follows that rights appertain to man in right of his existence, and must therefore be equal to every man. The great Thomas Jefferson asked, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure? They have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath." Starting at the foundation of the pyramid, let us first consider the origin of those freedoms we have come to know as human rights. There are only two possible sources. Rights are either God-given as part of the divine plan, or they are granted by government as part of a political plan. Reason, necessity, tradition, and religious convictions all lead me to accept the divine origin of these rights. If we accept the premise that human rights are granted by government, then we must be willing to accept the corollary that they can be denied by government. I, for one, shall never accept that premise. As the French political economist Bastiat phrased it so succinctly, life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. I support the doctrine of separation of church and state, as traditionally interpreted to prohibit the establishment of an official national religion. But I am opposed to the doctrine of separation of church and state as currently interpreted to divorce government from a formal recognition of God. The current trend strikes a potentially fatal blow at the concept of the divine origin of our rights and unlocks the door for an easy entry of tyranny. If Americans should ever come to believe that their rights and freedoms are instituted among men by politicians and bureaucrats, then they will no longer carry the proud inheritance of their forefathers, but will grovel before their masters, seeking favors and dispensations, a throwback to the feudal system of the Dark Ages. We must ever keep in mind the inspired words of Thomas Jefferson as found in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Since God created man with certain unalienable rights, and man in turn created government to help secure and safeguard those rights, it follows that man is superior to the creature which he has created. Man is superior to government and should remain master over it, not the other way around. Even the non-believer can appreciate the logic of this relationship. Now, leaving aside for a moment the question of the divine origin of rights, it is obvious that a government is nothing more or less than a relatively small group of citizens who have been hired, in a sense, by the rest of us to perform certain functions and discharge certain responsibilities which have been authorized. It stands to reason that the government itself has no innate power or privilege to do anything. Its only source of authority and power is who created it. This is made clear in the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, which reads, "We, the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The important thing to keep in mind is that the people who have created their government can give to that government only such powers as they themselves have in the first place. Obviously, they cannot give that which they do not possess. So the question boils down to this: what powers properly belong to each and every person in the absence of and prior to the establishment of any organized governmental form? A hypothetical question? Yes, indeed. But it is a question which is vital to an understanding of the principles which underlie the proper function of government. Of course, as James Madison, sometimes called the father of the Constitution, said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls of government would be necessary. In a primitive state, there is no doubt that each man would be justified in using force, if necessary, to defend himself against physical harm, against theft of the fruits of his labor, and against enslavement of another. This principle was clearly explained by Bastiat. Each of us, he says, has a natural right from God to defend his person, his liberty, and his property. These are the three basic requirements of life, and the preservation of any one of them is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two. For what are our faculties but the extension of our individuality? And what is property but an extension of our faculties? Indeed, the early pioneers found that their time and energy was being spent doing all three, defending themselves, their property, and their liberty, in what properly was called the lawless West. In order for man to prosper, he cannot afford to spend his time constantly guarding his family, his fields, and his property against attack and theft. So he joins together with his neighbors and hires a sheriff. At this precise moment, government is born. The individual citizen delegates to the sheriff their unquestionable right to protect themselves. The sheriff now does for them only what they had a right to do for themselves, nothing more. Quoting again from Bastiat, if every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. Thus, the principle of collective right, its reason for existing, its lawfulness, is based on individual right. So far, so good. But now we come to the moment of truth. Suppose Pioneer A wants another horse for his wagon. He doesn't have the money to buy one, but since Pioneer B has an extra horse, he decides that he's entitled to share in his neighbor's good fortune. Is he entitled to take his neighbor's horse? Obviously not. If his neighbor wishes to give it or lend it, that is another question. But so long as Pioneer B wishes to keep his property, Pioneer A has no just claim to it. If A has no proper power to take B's property, can he delegate any such power to the sheriff? No. Even if everyone in the community desires that B give his extra horse to A, they have no right individually or collectively to force him to do it. They cannot delegate a power they themselves do not have. This important principle was clearly understood and explained by John Locke nearly 300 years ago in these words: "For nobody can transfer to another more power than he has in himself, and nobody has an absolute arbitrary power over himself or over any other to destroy his own life or take away the life or property of another." This means, then, that the proper function of government is limited only to those spheres of activity within which the individual citizen has the right to act. Giving its just powers from the governed, government becomes primarily a mechanism for defense against bodily harm, theft, and involuntary servitude. It cannot claim the power to redistribute the wealth or force reluctant citizens to perform acts of charity against their will. Government is created by man. No man possesses such power to delegate. The creature cannot exceed the Creator. In general terms, therefore, the proper role of government includes such defensive activities as maintaining national, military, and local police forces for protection against loss of life, loss of property, and loss of liberty at the hands of either foreign despots or domestic criminals. It also includes those powers necessarily incidental to the protective function, such as, 1, the maintenance of courts, for those charged with crime and where disputes between citizens may be impartially settled. And 2, the establishment of a monetary system and a standard of weights and measures so that courts may render money judgments, taxing authorities may levy taxes, and citizens may have a uniform standard to use in their business dealings. My attitude toward government is succinctly expressed by the following provision taken from the Alabama Constitution: that the sole object and only legitimate end of government is to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. And when the government assumes other functions, it is usurpation and oppression. An important test I use in passing judgment upon an act of government is this: if it were up to an individual to punish my neighbor for violating a given law, would it offend my conscience to do so? Since my conscience will never permit me to physically punish my fellow man unless he has done something evil, or unless he has failed to do something which I have a moral right to require of him to do, I will never knowingly authorize my agent, the government, to do this on my behalf. I realize that when I give my consent to the adoption of a law, I specifically instruct the police, the government, to take either the life, liberty, or property of anyone who disobeys that law. Furthermore, I tell them that if anyone resists the enforcement of the law, they are to use any means necessary, yes, even putting the lawbreaker to death or putting him in jail, to overcome such resistance. These are extreme measures, but unless laws are enforced, anarchy results. As John Locke explained many years ago, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. For in all the states of created beings, capable of laws. Where there is no law, there is no freedom. For liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others, which cannot be where there is no law, and is not, as we are told, a liberty for every man to do what he lists. For who could be free when every other man's humor might dominate over him? But a liberty to dispose and order freely as he lists his person, actions, possessions, and his whole property within the allowance of those laws under which he is, and therein not be subject to the arbitrary will of another, but freely follow his own. We Americans should use extreme care before lending our support to any proposed government program. We should fully recognize that government is no plaything. As George Washington warned, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. It is an instrument of force, and unless our conscience is clear, that we would not hesitate to put a man to death, put him in jail, or forcibly deprive him of his property for failing to obey a given law, we should oppose it. Another standard I use in determining what law is good and what is bad is the Constitution of the United States. I regard this inspired document as a solemn agreement between the citizens of this nation, which every officer of government is under sacred duty to obey. As Washington stated so clearly in his immortal farewell address, the basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists, until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presuppose the duty of every individual to obey the established government. I am especially mindful that the Constitution provides that the great bulk of the legitimate activities of government are to be carried out at the state or local level. This is the only way in which the principle of self-government can be made effective. As James Madison said before the adoption of the Constitution, we rest all our political experiments on the capacity of for self-government. Thomas Jefferson made this interesting observation. Sometimes it is said that man cannot be trusted with government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? Or have we found angels in the forms of kings to govern him? Let history answer this question. It is a firm principle that the smallest or lowest level that can possibly undertake the task is the one that should do so. First, the community or city. If the city cannot handle it, then the county. Next, the state. And only if no smaller unit can possibly do the job should the federal government be considered. This is merely the application to the field of politics of that wise and time-tested principle of never asking a to do that which can be done by a smaller group. And so far as government is concerned, the smaller the unit and the closer it is to the people, the easier it is to guide it, to correct it, to keep it solvent, and to keep our freedom. Thomas Jefferson understood this principle very well and explained it this way. The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to every one exactly the function he is competent to. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations. The state government with the civil rights, law, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally. The counties with the local concerns of the counties, and each ward direct the within itself. It is by dividing and subdividing these republics from the great national one down through all its subordinations until it ends in the administration of every man's farm by himself, by placing under everyone what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun, the generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body. It is well to remember that the states of this republic created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states. A category of government activity which today not only requires the closest scrutiny, but which also poses a grave danger to our continued freedom, is the activity not within the proper sphere of government. No one has authority to grant such powers as welfare programs, schemes for redistributing the wealth, and activities which coerce people into acting in accordance with a prescribed code of social planning. There is one simple test. Do I, as an individual, have a right to use force upon my neighbor to accomplish this goal? If I do have such a right, then I may delegate that power to my government to exercise it on my behalf. If I do not have that right as an individual, then I cannot delegate it to government, and I cannot ask my government to perform the act for me. To be sure, there are times when this principle of the proper role of government is most annoying and inconvenient. If I could only force the ignorant to provide for themselves, or the selfish to be their wealth. But if we permit government to manufacture its own authority out of thin air, and to create self-proclaimed powers not delegated to it by the people, then the creature exceeds the creator and becomes master. Beyond that point, where shall we draw the line? Who is to say this far, but no farther? What clear principle will stay the hand of government from reaching farther and yet farther into our daily lives? We shouldn't forget the wise words of President Grover Cleveland, that though the people support the government should not support the people. We should also remember that nothing can enter the public treasury for the benefit of one citizen or one class unless other citizens and classes have been forced to send it in. As Bastia pointed out over 100 years ago, once government steps over this clear line between the protective or negative role into the aggressive role of redistributing the wealth and providing so-called benefits for some of its citizens, it then becomes a means for what is accurately described as legalized plunder. It becomes a lever of unlimited power, which is the sought-after prize of unscrupulous individuals and pressure groups, each seeking to control the machine to fatten his own pockets or to benefit its favorite charities, all with the other fellow's money, of course. Listen to Bastia's explanation of this legal plunder. When a portion of the wealth is transferred from one person who owns it without his consent and without compensation, either by force or by fraud, to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated, that an act of plunder is committed. How is this legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply. See if the law takes from one person what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. As history has proven, each class or special interest group competes with the others to throw the lever of governmental power in their favor, or at least to immunize itself against the effects of a previous thrust. Labor gets a minimum wage, so agriculture seeks a price support. Consumers demand price controls, and industry gets protective tariffs. In the end, no one is much further ahead, and everyone suffers the burdens of a gigantic bureaucracy and a loss of personal freedom. With each group out to get its share of the spoils, such governments historically have mushroomed into total welfare states. We're well on the way. Once the process begins, once the principle of the protective function of government gives way to the aggressive or redistributive function, then forces are set in motion that drive the nation toward totalitarianism. It is impossible to introduce into society a greater evil than this, the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. Students of history know that no government in the history of mankind has ever created any wealth. People who work create wealth. James R. Evans, in his inspiring book, The Glorious Quest, gives this simple illustration of legalized plunder. Assume, for example, that we were all farmers, and that we received a letter from the government telling us that we were going to get $1,000 this year for plowed up acreage. But rather than the normal method of collection, we were to take this letter and collect $69.71 from Bill Brown at such and such an address, $82.47 from Henry Jones, $59.80 from Bill Smith, and so on down the line, that these men would make up our farm subsidy. Nor would 99% of the farmers walk up and ring a man's doorbell, hold out a hand and say, "Give me what you've earned, even though I have not." We simply would not do it, because we would be facing directly the violation of a moral law. Thou shalt not steal. In short, we would be accountable for our actions. The free creative energy of this choice nation created more than 50% of all the world's products and possessions in the short span of 160 years. The only imperfection in the system is the imperfection in man himself. The last paragraph in this remarkable Evans book, which I commend to all, reads, "No historian of the future will ever be able to prove that the ideas of individual liberty practiced in the United States of America were a failure. He may be able to prove that we were not yet worthy of them. The choice is ours." According to Marcus' doctrine, a human being is primarily an economic creature. In other words, his material well-being is all important. His privacy and his freedom are strictly secondary. The Soviet Constitution reflects this philosophy in its emphasis on security. Food, clothing, housing, medical care, the same things that might be considered in a jail. The basic concept is that the government has full responsibility for the welfare of the people, and in order to discharge that responsibility must assume control of all their activities. It is significant that in actuality the Russian people have few of the rights supposedly guaranteed to them in their constitution, while the American people have them in great abundance, even though they are not guaranteed. The reason, of course, is that material gain and economic security simply cannot be guaranteed by any government. Material gain and economic security are the result and reward of hard work and industrious production. Unless the people bake one loaf of bread for each citizen, the government cannot guarantee that each will have one loaf to eat. Constitutions can be written, laws can be passed, and imperial decrees can be issued. But unless the bread is produced, it can never be distributed. Why then do Americans bake more bread, manufacture more shoes, and assemble more TV sets than the Russians? They do so precisely because our government does not guarantee these things. If it did, there would be so many accompanying taxes, controls, regulations, and political manipulations that the productive genius that is America's would soon be reduced to the floundering level of waste and inefficiency now found behind the Iron Curtain. As Henry D. Thoreau explained, this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alacrity with which it got out of the way. It does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character inherent in the American people has done all that has been accomplished. And it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes its way. For government is an expedient by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone. And as has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. Now, with all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and a prosperous people? Still one thing more, fellow citizens, said Thomas Jefferson, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, which shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. The principle behind this American philosophy can be reduced to a rather simple formula. Economic security for all is impossible without widespread abundance. 2, abundance is impossible without industrious and efficient production. And 3, such production is impossible without energetic, willing, and eager labor. And 4, this is not possible without incentive. And 5, of all forms of incentive, the freedom to attain a reward for one's labors is the most sustaining for most people. Sometimes called the profit motive, it is simply the right to plan and to earn and to enjoy the fruits of your labor. 6, this profit motive diminishes as government controls, regulations, and taxes increase to deny the fruits of success to those who produce it. 7, therefore any attempt through governmental intervention to redistribute the material rewards of labor can only in the eventual destruction of the productive base of society, without which real abundance and security for more than the ruling elite is quite impossible. Now we have before us currently a sad example of what happens to a nation which ignores these eternal basic principles. Former FBI agent Dan Smoot succinctly pointed this out on his broadcast number 649, dated January 29, 1968, as follows. England was killed by an idea. The idea that the weak, indolent, and profligate must be supported by the strong, industrious, and frugal, to the degree that taxed consumers will have a living standard comparable to that of taxpayers. The idea that government exists for the purpose of plundering those who work to give the product of their labor to those who do not work. The economic and social cannibalism produced by this communist socialist idea will destroy any society which adopts it and clings to it as a basic principle. Any society. Nearly 200 years ago, Adam Smith, an Englishman, who understood these principles very well, published his great book, The Wealth of Nations, which contains this statement: the natural effort of every individual to better his own condition, when suffered to exert itself with freedom and security, is so powerful a principle that it is alone and without any assistance not only capable of carrying on the society to wealth and prosperity, but of surmounting 100 impertinent obstructions with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operations, though the effect of these obstructions is always more or less either to encroach upon its freedom or to diminish its security. This should be required reading for every Britisher. On the surface this may sound heartless and insensitive to the needs of those less fortunate individuals who are found in any society, no matter how affluent. What about the lame, the sick, and the destitute? Is an often voiced question. Most other countries in the world have attempted to use the power of government to meet this need. Yet in every case, the improvement has been marginal at best, and has resulted in the long run creating more misery, more poverty, and certainly less freedom than when government first stepped in. As Henry Grady Weaver wrote in his excellent book, The Spring of Human Progress, most of the major ills of the world have been caused by well-meaning people who ignored the principle of individual freedom, except as applied to themselves, and who are obsessed with a fanatical zeal to improve the lot of mankind in the mass through some pet formula of their own. The harm done by ordinary criminals, murderers, gangsters, and thieves is negligible in comparison with the agony inflicted upon human beings by the professional do-gooders who attempt to set themselves up as gods on earth and who would ruthlessly the harm done by ordinary criminals, murderers, gangsters, and thieves is negligible in comparison with the agony inflicted upon human beings by the professional do-gooders who attempt to set themselves up as gods and who would ruthlessly force their views on all others, with the abiding assurance that the end justifies the means. By comparison, America traditionally has followed Jefferson's advice of relying on individual action and charity. The result is that the United States has fewer cases of genuine hardship per capita than any other country in the entire world or throughout all history. Even during the Depression of the 1930s, Americans ate and lived better than most people in other countries do today. In reply to the argument that just a little bit of socialism is good so long as it doesn't go too far, it is tempting to say, in like fashion, just a little bit of theft or a little bit of cancer is good. History proves that the growth of the welfare state is difficult to check before it comes to its full flower of dictatorship. But let us hope that this time around, the trend can be reversed. If not reversed, then we will see the inevitability of complete socialism probably within our lifetime. Three factors may make the difference, and this should give us hope. First, there is sufficient historical knowledge of the failures of socialism and of the past mistakes of previous civilizations. Secondly, there are modern means of rapid communication to transmit these lessons of history to the large, literate population. And thirdly, there is a growing number of dedicated men and women who, at great personal sacrifice, are actively working to promote a wider appreciation of these concepts. A timely joining together of these three factors may make it entirely possible for us to reverse the trend. This brings up the next question. How is it possible to cut out the various welfare state features of our government which have already fastened themselves like cancer cells on the body politic? Isn't drastic surgery already necessary? And can it be performed without endangering the patient? In answer, it is obvious that drastic measures are called for. No halfway or compromise actions will suffice. Like all surgery, it will not be without discomfort, and perhaps even some scar tissue for a long time to come. But it must be done if the patient is to be saved, and it can be done without undue risk. Obviously, not all welfare state programs currently in force can be dropped simultaneously without causing tremendous economic and social upheaval. To try to do so would be like finding oneself at the controls of a hijacked airplane and attempting to return it by simply cutting off the engines in flight. It must be flown back, lowered in altitude, gradually reduced in speed, and brought in for a smooth landing. Translated into practical terms, this means that the first step toward restoring the limited concept of government should be to freeze all welfare programs at their present level. Making sure that no new ones are added. The next step would be to allow all present programs to run out their term with absolutely no renewal. And the third step would involve the gradual phasing out of those programs which are indefinite in their term. In my opinion, the bulk of the transition could be accomplished within a 10-year period and virtually completed within 20 years. Congress would serve as the initiator of this phase-out program, and the President would act as the executive in accordance with traditional constitutional procedures. As I summarize what I have attempted to cover, try to visualize the structural relationship between the 6 vital concepts that have made America the envy of the world. I have reference to, first, the foundation of the divine origin of rights. Second, limited government. Third, the pillars of economic freedom and personal freedom, which 4 result in abundance, followed by 5, security, and 6, the pursuit of happiness. America was built upon a firm foundation and created over many years from the bottom up. Other nations, impatient to acquire equal abundance, security, and the pursuit of happiness, rush headlong into that final phase of construction without building foundations for supporting pillars. Their efforts are futile. And even in our country, There are those who think that because we now have the good things in life, we can afford to dispense with the foundations which have made them possible. They want to remove any recognition of God from governmental institutions. They want to expand the scope and research of government, which will undermine and erode our economic and personal freedoms. The abundance which is ours, the carefree existence which we have come to accept as a matter of course, can be toppled by these foolish experimenters and power seekers. By the grace of God and with His help, we shall fence them off from the foundations of our liberty and then begin our task of repair and construction. Summary to this discussion, I present a declaration of principles which has recently been prepared by a few American patriots and to which I wholeheartedly subscribe. As an independent American for constitutional government, I declare that first, I believe that no people can maintain freedom unless their political institutions are founded upon faith in God and belief in the existence of moral law. Second, I believe that God has endowed men with certain unalienable rights as set forth in the Declaration of Independence, and that no legislature and no majority, however great, may morally limit or destroy these. That the sole function of government is to protect life, liberty, and property, and anything more than this is usurpation and oppression. Third, I believe that the Constitution of the United States was prepared and adopted by men under the inspiration from Almighty God. That it is a solemn compact between the people of the states of this nation, which all officers of government are under duty to obey. That the external moral laws expressed therein must be adhered to, or individual liberty will perish. Fourth, I believe it a violation of the Constitution for government to deprive the individual of either life, liberty, or property except for these purposes. A, punish crime and provide for the administration of justice. B, protect the right and control of private property. C, wage defensive war and provide for the nation's defense. D, compel each one who enjoys the protection of government to bear his fair share of performing the above functions. 5, I hold that the Constitution denies government the power to take from the individual either his life, liberty, or property except in accordance with moral law. That the same moral law which governs the actions of men when acting alone is also applicable when they act in concert with others. That no citizen or group of citizens has any right to direct their agent, the government, to perform any act which would be evil or offensive to the conscience if that citizen were performing the act himself outside the framework of government. 6, I am hereby resolved that under no circumstances shall the freedoms guaranteed by the Bill of Rights be infringed. In particular, I am opposed to any attempt on the part of the to deny the people their right to bear arms, to worship and pray when and where they choose, or to own and control private property. Seven, I consider ourselves at war with international communism. At war with international communism, which is committed to the destruction of our government, our right of property, and our freedom. That it is treason as defined by the Constitution, to give aid and comfort to this implacable enemy. Eight, I am unalterably opposed to socialism, either in part, and regarded as an unconstitutional usurpation of power and a denial of the right of private property for government to own or operate the means of producing and distributing goods and services in competition with private enterprise, or to regiment owners in the legitimate use. Or to regiment owners in the legitimate use of private property. 9, I maintain that every person who enjoys the protection of his life, liberty, and property should bear his fair share of the cost of government in providing that protection. That the elementary principles of justice set forth in the Constitution demand that all taxes imposed be uniform, and that every person's property or income be taxed at the same rate. Ten, I believe in honest money. The gold and silver coinage of the Constitution, and a circulating medium convertible into such money without loss. I regard it as a flagrant violation of the explicit provisions of the Constitution for the federal government to make it a criminal offense to use gold or silver coin as legal tender or to issue irredeemable paper money. Eleven, I believe that each state is sovereign in performing those functions reserved to it by the Constitution, and it is destructive of our federal system and the right of self-government guaranteed under the Constitution for the government to regulate or control the states in performing their functions or to engage in performing such functions itself. 12, I consider it a violation of the Constitution for the federal government to levy taxes for the support of state or local government. That no state or local government can accept funds from the federal and remain independent in performing its functions, or can the citizens exercise their rights of self-government under such conditions. 13, I deem it a violation of the right of private property guaranteed under the Constitution for the federal government to forcibly deprive the citizens of this nation of their property through taxation or otherwise, and make a gift thereof to foreign governments or their citizens. I believe that no treaty or agreement with other countries should deprive our citizens of rights guaranteed them by the Constitution. And 15, I consider it a direct violation of the obligation imposed upon it by the Constitution for the federal government to dismantle or weaken our military establishment below that point required for the protection of the states against invasion, or to surrender or commit our men, arms, or money to the control of foreign or world organizations or governments. These things I have mentioned I believe to be the proper role of government. We have strayed far afield. We must return to basic concepts and principles, to eternal verities. There is no other way. The storm signals are up. They are clear and ominous. As Americans, citizens of the greatest nation under heaven, we face difficult days. Never since the days of the Civil War, 100 years ago, has this choice nation faced such a crisis. Taylor Caldwell, the most widely read living author in the world, confirms this fact in the current issue of the American Opinion magazine in these words: "This year is the most momentous year for America, probably the most momentous in her history. In 1968, the American people must have a final opportunity, whether to return to constitutional, conservative, and sound government, whether we pull in our belts and stop frivoling away our hard-earned money on the tens of millions of pigs at the trough who are devouring our lives, and our substance and our very bread. Whether we tell other nations to stop holding out their greedy paws, and whether we elect a man or a blob to the presidency, not to mention the Congress. On the American people's final and terrible decision, our very lives rest. This is our last time on the playing fields of freedom." Unquote. Echoing the warning of the 29th Freedom Forum at the American Heritage Center, I warn Americans everywhere that America's four deadly realities of 1968 are: 1. Through the actions of our federal government, America is placing too much trust in the rulers of Soviet communism. 2. Through the apathy of her citizens, America is traveling toward dictatorial federalism. 3. Through the exercise of political expediency, the police powers of our government are condoning the breakdown of law and order. And 4, under the pressure of minority groups and constant propagandizement for change, is cultivating the behavior of a godless society. Now, can we cope with these realities? Yes, I believe we can. In closing, I wish to refer to you to the words of the patriot Thomas Paine, whose writings helped so much to stir into a flaming spirit the smoldering embers of patriotism during the days of the American Revolution. He said, "These are times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness is everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated." President Theodore Roosevelt warned that the things that will destroy America are prosperity at any price, peace at any price, safety first instead of duty first, and love of soft living and the get-rich-quick theory of life. I, for one, intend to keep fighting. My personal attitude is one of resolution, not resignation. I have an abiding faith in the American people. I pray that we will never do anything that will jeopardize in any manner our heritage. If we live and work so as to enjoy the approbation of divine providence, we cannot fail. Without that help, we cannot succeed. So I urge all Americans to put their courage to the test. Let us be firm in our conviction that our cause is just. Reaffirm our faith in all things for which true Americans have always stood. I urge all Americans to arouse themselves and stay aroused. We must not make any further concessions to communism at home or abroad. And we do not need to. We should oppose godless communism from our position of strength, for we are not weak. We are not cowards, said Ted Dealey of the Dallas Morning News, and will not allow sloughs of degradation. We do not want to be lulled to sleep anymore. We are awake and angry and intend to remain so. My fellow Americans, there is much work to be done. The time is short. Let us begin in earnest now, and may God bless our efforts. Thank you very kindly.
My beloved brethren and sisters, what a glorious blessing it is to be assembled in another general conference of the church. I ask for an interest in your faith and prayers as I speak to you about a subject that is very close to my heart and that affects the worldwide church. We have recently celebrated the bicentennial of the signing of the United States Constitution. That commemoration marked the beginning of a series of bicentennial anniversary events leading up to the ratification of the Constitution, implementation of the government it created, and the writing and ratification of the Bill of Rights. We look forward to the future commemoration of each of these important events during the next 4 years. It is all a result of these events that are able to meet today in a peace as members of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. For this, we should all be eternally grateful. I desire, therefore, to speak to you about our divine Constitution, which the Lord said belongs to all mankind and would be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh according to just and holy principles. The Constitution of the United States has served as a model for many nations and is the oldest Constitution in use today. I established the Constitution of this land, said the Lord, by the hands of wise men, whom I raised up unto this very purpose. For centuries, the Lord kept America hidden in the hollow of his hand until the time was ripe to unveil her for her destiny in the last days. It is wisdom that this land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations, said Lehi. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, and that there would be no inheritance. In the Lord's due time, his Spirit wrought upon Columbus, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, the others, and others came to America. They testified of God's intervention in their behalf. The Book of Mormon records that they humbled themselves before the Lord, and the power of the Lord was with them. Our Father in heaven planned the coming forth of the founding fathers and their form of government as the necessary great prologue leading to the restoration of the gospel. Recall what our Savior Jesus Christ said nearly 2,000 years ago when he visited this promised land. For it is wisdom in the Father that they should establish this land and be set up as a free people by the power of the Father, and these might come forth. America, the land of liberty, was to be the Lord's latter-day base of operations for his restored church. The Declaration of Independence affirmed the founding fathers' belief and trust in God in these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The Doctrine and Covenants states, "We believe that no government can exist in peace except such laws are framed and held inviolate as will secure to each individual the free exercise of conscience, the right and control of property, and the protection of life." life, liberty, property, mankind's three great rights. At the conclusion of the Declaration of Independence, they wrote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This declaration was a promise that would demand terrific sacrifice on the part of its signers. 5 of the signers were captured as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 men had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the Revolutionary War. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 died from the wounds or the hardship of the war. The Lord said he redeemed the land by the shedding of blood. Nephi recorded that the founders were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of other nations. The years immediately preceding the Constitutional Convention were filled with disappointments and threats to the new one peace. Washington was offered a kingship, which he adamantly refused. Nephi had prophesied hundreds of years before that this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles, and there shall be no kings upon the land. Between the critical years of 1783 and 1787, an outsider viewing the affairs of the United States would have thought the 13 states differ in so many ways that they could never be effective as united. The world powers were confident that this nation would not last. Eventually, 12 of the states met in Philadelphia to address the problem. Madison said at the beginning of the convention that the delegates were not digesting a plan which, in its operation, would decide forever the fate of the Republican government. "The Lord knoweth all things from the beginning," said Nephi. "Wherefore he prepareth a way to accomplish all his words among the children of the Lord." 4 months later, the convention delegates had completed their work. As Gladstone said, it was the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man. And the prophet Joseph called it a glorious standard, a heavenly banner. The delegates were the recipients of heavenly inspiration. James Madison, often referred to as the father of the Constitution, said it is possible for a man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand which had been so frequently signally extended to our relief in the critical stages of the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton, famous as the originator of the Federalist Papers and the author of 51 of these essays, from my own part, I sincerely esteem it a system which, without the finger of God, never could have been suggested and agreed upon by this diversity of interest. Charles Pinckney, a very effective participant and author of the Pinckney Plan during the convention, said, "When the great work was done and published, I was struck with amazement, noting less than the superintending hand of Providence that so miraculously carried us through the war could have brought it about so complete upon the whole." Within 10 months, the Constitution was ratified by 9 states and was therefore in force for them. Prophecy had been fulfilled. During his inaugural address in 1789, George Washington, a man who was raised up by God, said, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the charter of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency." In compliance with Article 6 of the Constitution, the very first act passed by Congress and signed by President Washington on June 1st, 1789, was the actual oath to support the Constitution that was to be administered to the various government officers. The dedicatory prayer for the Kirtland Temple, as dictated by the Lord and found in the Doctrine and Covenants, contains these words: "May those principles which were so honorably and nobly defended, namely the Constitution of our land by our fathers, be established forever." Unquote. Shortly after President Spencer W. Kimball became president of the church, he assigned me to go into the vault of the St. George Temple and check the records. As I did so, I realized the fulfillment of a dream I had had ever since learning of the visit of the founding fathers to the St. George Temple. I saw with my own eyes the record of the work which was done for the founding fathers of this great nation, beginning with George Washington. Think of it. The founding fathers of this nation, those great men, appeared within those sacred walls and had their vicarious work done for them. President Wilford Woodruff spoke of it in these words: "Before I left St. George, the spirits of the dead gathered around me, wanting to know why we did not redeem them. Said they, you have had the use of the endowment house for a number of years, and yet nothing has ever been done for us. We laid the foundation of the government you now enjoy, and we never apostatized from it, but we remained true to it and were faithful to God." After he became president of the church, President Wilford Woodruff declared that those men who laid the foundation of this American government were the best spirits the God of heaven could find on the face of the earth. They were choice spirits and were inspired of the Lord. Unfortunately, we as a nation have apostatized in various degrees from different constitutional principles as proclaimed by the inspired founders. We are fast approaching that moment prophesied by Joseph Smith when he said, "Even this nation will be on the very verge of crumbling to pieces and tumbling to the ground. And when the Constitution is upon the brink of ruin, this people will be the staff upon which the nation shall lean, and they shall bear the Constitution away from the very verge of destruction." For centuries, our forefathers suffered and sacrificed that we might be the recipients of the blessings of freedom. They were willing to sacrifice so much to establish us as a free people. Should we not be willing to do the same to maintain that freedom for ourselves and for future generations? Only in this foreordained land, under its God-inspired Constitution and the resulting environment of freedom, was it possible to have established the restored church. It is our responsibility to see that this freedom is perpetuated so that the church may more easily flourish in the future. The Lord said, "Therefore I, the Lord, justify you and your brethren of my church in befriending that law which is the constitutional law of the land. How then can we best befriend the Constitution in this critical hour and secure the blessings of liberty and ensure the protection and guidance of our Father in heaven? First and foremost, we must be righteous. John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." If the Constitution is to have continuance, this American nation, and especially the Latter-day Saints, must be victorious, virtuous. The Book of Mormon warns us relative to our living in this free land. "Wherefore this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring." And if it is so, be what they shall serve him according to the commandments which he hath given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them. Wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity. If so, it shall be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes. But unto the righteous it shall be blessed forever. And now, warned Moroni, we can behold the decrees of God concerning this land, that it is a land of promise, and whatsoever nation shall possess it shall serve God, or they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them, and the fullness of his wrath cometh upon them when they are ripened in iniquity. Two great American Christian civilizations, the Jaredites and the Nephites, were swept off because they did not serve the God of the land, who is Jesus Christ. What will become of our civilization? Second, we must learn the principles of the Constitution in the tradition of the Founding Fathers. Have we read the Federalist Papers? Are we reading the Constitution and pondering it? Are we aware of its principles? Are we abiding by these principles and teaching them to others? Could we defend the Constitution? Can we recognize when a law is constitutionally unsound? Do we know what the prophets have said about the Constitution and the threats to it? As Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. Third, we must become involved in civic affairs to see that we are properly represented. The Lord said that he holds men accountable for their acts in relationship to governments, both in making the laws and administering them. We must follow this counsel from the Lord. Honest men and wise men should be sought for diligently, and good men and wise men ye should observe to uphold. Otherwise, whatsoever is less than these cometh of evil. Note the qualities that the Lord demands of those who are to represent us. They must be good, wise, and honest. Fourth, we must make our influence felt by our vote, our letters, our teaching, and our advice. We must become accurately informed, and then let others know how we feel. The prophet Joseph Smith said, "It is our duty to concentrate all of our influence to make popular that which is sound and good, and unpopular that which is unsound." 'Tis right politically for a man who has influence to use it. From henceforth, I will maintain all the influence I can get. I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. It will be saved by the righteous citizens of this nation who love and cherish freedom. It will be saved by enlightened members of the church, among others, men and women who understand and abide the principles of the Constitution. I reverence the Constitution of the United States as a sacred document. To me, its words are akin to the revelations of God, for God has placed his stamp of approval upon it. I testify that the God of heaven sent some of his choicest spirits to lay the foundation of this government, and he has now sent other choice spirits to preserve it. We, the blessed beneficiaries of the Constitution, face difficult days in America, a land which is choice above all other lands. May God give us the faith and the courage exhibited by those patriots who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. May we be equally as valiant and as free. I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
My beloved brethren and sisters, seen and unseen, and we are all brothers and sisters, children of the same Father in the Spirit. Humbly and gratefully I stand before you on this anniversary date of the organization of the restored Church of Jesus Christ, 142 years ago. I love a general conference of the church, except this particular part. And yet I rejoice in the opportunity to bear testimony to this, the greatest work in all the world. Last fall, I was invited by Baron von Blomberg, President, United Religions Organization, to represent the church as a guest of the King of Persia at the 2500th anniversary of the founding of the Persian Empire by Cyrus the Great. Advised by the First Presidency to accept the invitation, I left immediately following the October conference to join with representatives of 27 world religions, some 50 monarchs and other notables at this historic celebration in Iran. King Cyrus lived more than 500 years before Christ and figured in the prophecies of the Old Testament, mentioned in 2 Chronicles and the book of Ezra, and by the prophets Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Daniel. The Bible states how the Lord stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia. Cyrus restored certain political and social rights to the captive Hebrews and gave them permission to return to Jerusalem, and directed that Jehovah's temple should there be rebuilt. Parley P. Pratt, in describing the prophet Joseph Smith, said that he had the boldness, courage, temperance, perseverance, and generosity of a Cyrus. President Wilford Woodruff said, "Now I have thought many times that some of those ancient kings that were raised up had in some respects more regard for the carrying out of some of these basic principles and laws than even the Latter-day Saints have in our day. I will take as an example Cyrus. To trace the life of Cyrus from his birth to his death, whether he knew it or not, it looked as though he lived by inspiration in all his movements. He began with that temperance and virtue which would sustain any Christian country or any Christian king. Many of these principles followed him, and I have thought many of them were worthy, in many respects, the attention of men who have the gospel of Jesus Christ. God, the Father of us all, uses the men of the earth, especially good men, to accomplish his purposes. It has been true in the past. It is true today. It will be true in the future. Perhaps the Lord needs such men on the outside of his church to help it along, said the late Orson F. Whitney. They're among its auxiliaries and can do more good for the cause where the Lord has placed them than anywhere else. Hence, some are drawn into the fold and receive a testimony of the truth, while others remain unconverted, the beauties and glories of the gospel being veiled temporarily from their view for a wise purpose. The Lord will open their eyes in his own due time. God is using more than one people for the accomplishment of his great and marvelous work. The Latter-day Saints cannot do it all. It is too vast, too arduous for any one people. We have no quarrel with the Gentiles. They are our partners in a certain sense. We love all of our Father's children. We invite them all to assist in this great effort. This would certainly have been true of Colonel Thomas L. Kane, a true friend of the saints in their dire need. It was true of General Donovan, who, when ordered by his superior to shoot and kill Joseph Smith, said, "It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. And if you execute these men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal, so help me God." We honor these partners because of their devotion to correct principles, overshadowed their devotion to popularity, party, or personalities. We honor our founding fathers of this republic for the same reason. God raised up these patriot partners to perform their mission, and he called them wise men. The First Presidency acknowledged that wisdom when they gave us the guideline a few years ago for supporting political candidates, quote, who are truly dedicated to the Constitution in the tradition of the Founding Fathers. That tradition has been well summarized in the book, The American Tradition by Clarence Carson. The Lord said that the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Our wise founders seem to understand better than most of us our own Scripture, which states, "It is the nature and disposition of almost all men. As soon as they get a little authority, they will immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion." To help prevent this, the founders knew that our elected leaders should be bound by certain fixed principles. Said Thomas Jefferson, "In questions of power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." These wise founders, our patriotic partners, seem to appreciate more than most of us the blessings of the boundaries which the Lord set within the Constitution. For he said, "And as pertaining to law of man, whatsoever is more or less than this cometh of evil." In God the founders trusted, and in his Constitution, not in the arm of flesh. "O Lord," said Nephi, "I have trusted in thee, and I will trust in thee forever. I will not put my trust in the arm of flesh. Cursed is he that putteth his trust in man, or maketh flesh his arm." President J. Reuben Clark put it well when he said, "God provided that in this land of liberty, our political allegiance shall run not to individuals, that is, to government officials, no matter how great or how small they may be. Under his plan, our allegiance, and the only allegiance we owe as citizens or denizens of the United States, runs to our inspired Constitution, which God himself set up. So runs the oath of office of those who participate in government. A certain loyalty we do owe to the office which a man holds, but even here we owe, just by reason of our citizenship, no loyalty to the man himself. In many other countries, it is to the individual that allegiance runs. This principle of allegiance to the Constitution is basic to our freedom. It is one of the great principles that distinguishes this land of liberty from many other countries. Patriotism, said Theodore Roosevelt, means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands by the country. Every man, said Roosevelt, who parrots the cry of "stand by the president" without adding the proviso "so far as he serves the republic," takes an attitude as essentially unmanly as that of any Stuart royalist who championed the doctrine that the king could do no wrong. No self-respecting and intelligent free man could take such an attitude. And yet, as Latter-day Saints, we pray for our civic leaders and encourage them in their righteousness. To vote for wicked men, it would be a sin, said Hiram Smith. And the prophet Joseph Smith said, "Let the people of the whole Union, like the inflexible Romans, whenever they find a promise made by a candidate that is not practiced as an officer, hurl the miserable sycophant from his exaltation." Joseph and Hiram's trust did not run to the arm of flesh, but to God and eternal correct principles. "I am the greatest advocate of the Constitution of the United States there is on earth," said the prophet Joseph Smith. The warning of President Joseph Fielding Smith is most timely. He said, "Now I tell you, it is time the people of the United States were waking up, with the understanding that if they don't save the Constitution from the dangers that threaten it, we will have a change of government." Another guideline given by the first presidency was to support good and conscientious candidates of either party who are aware of the great dangers inherent in communism. The position of this church on the subject of communism has never changed. We consider it the greatest satanical threat to the peace, prosperity, and spread of God's work among men that exists on the face of the earth. Fortunately, we have materials to help us face this threat, such as President McKay's booklet of statements on communism and the Constitution of the United States, Cleon Skousen's book, The Naked Communist, which we were advised to read, some other fine books by LDS authors attempting to awaken and inform us of our duty, or such as Prophet's Principles of National Survival. Many are called, but few are chosen, and the Elders of Israel and the Constitution. But the greatest handbook for freedom in this fight against communism and other evils is the Book of Mormon. This leads me to the second great civic standard for the saints. For in addition to our inspired Constitution, we have the Scriptures. Joseph Smith said that the Book of Mormon was the keystone of our religion and the most correct book on earth. This most correct book on earth states that the downfall of two great American civilizations came as a result of secret conspiracies whose desire was to overthrow the freedom of the people. And they have caused the destruction of this people of whom I am now speaking, says Moroni, and also the destruction of the people of Nephi. Now, undoubtedly, Moroni could have pointed out many factors that led to the destruction of the people. But notice how he singled out the secret combinations, just as the church today could point out many threats to peace, prosperity, and the spread of God's work. But it has singled out the greatest threat as the great conspiracy. There is no conspiracy theory in the Book of Mormon. It is a conspiracy fact. And along this line, I would highly recommend to you a new book entitled None Dare Call It, Conspiracy by Gary Allen. Then Moroni speaks to us in this day and says, Wherefore the Lord commandeth you, when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to a sense of your awful situation, because this secret combination which shall be among you. The Book of Mormon further warns that whatever nation shall uphold such secret combinations to get power and gain until they shall spread over the nation, behold, they shall be destroyed. That scripture should alert us to what's ahead unless we repent, because there is no question but that our nation is increasingly upholding the communist conspiracy today. By court edict, communists can run for government office, teach in our schools, hold office in labor unions, work in our defense plants, serve in our merchant marines, and so forth. As a nation, we are helping, it would seem, to underwrite communist revolutionaries in our country. Now, we are assured that the church will remain on earth until the Lord comes again. But at what price? The saints in the early days were assured that Zion would be established in Jackson County. But look what their unfaithfulness cost them in bloodshed and delay. President Clark warned us that we stand in danger of losing our liberties, and that once lost, only blood will bring them back. And once lost, we of this church will, in order to keep the church going forward, have more sacrifices to make and more persecutions to endure than we have yet known. And he stated that if communism comes, here it will probably come in its full vigor, and there will be a lot of vacant places among those who guide and direct not only this government, but also this church of ours, unquote. Now, the third great civic standard for the saints is the inspired words of the prophets, particularly the living president, God's mouthpiece on the earth today, whom we heard at the opening of this conference this morning. We must keep our eye on the captain and judge the words of all others by his inspired counsel. The story is told how Brigham Young, driving through a community, saw a man building a house and simply told him to double the thickness of his walls. Accepting President Young as a prophet, the man changed his plans and doubled the walls. Shortly afterward, a flood came through the town, resulting in much destruction. But this man's wall stood. While putting the roof on his house, he was heard singing, "We thank thee, O God, for a prophet." Joseph Smith taught that a prophet was a prophet only when he was acting as such. Suppose a leader of the church were to tell you that you were supporting the wrong side of a particular issue. Some might immediately resist this leader and his counsel or ignore it. But I would suggest that you first apply the fourth great civic standard for the faithful saints. That standard is to live for, to get, and then to follow the promptings of the Holy Spirit. Said Brigham Young, "I am more afraid that this people have so much confidence in their leaders that they will not inquire for themselves of God whether they are led by Him. Let every man and woman know by the whisperings of the Spirit of God to themselves whether their leaders are walking in the path of the Lord dictates or not." A number of years ago, because of a statement which appeared to represent the policy of the church, a faithful member feared he was supporting the wrong candidate for public office. Humbly, he took the matter up to the Lord. Through the Spirit of the Lord, he gained the conviction of the course he should follow, and he dropped his support of this particular candidate. This good brother, by fervent prayer, got his answer, which time proved to be the right course. We urge all men to read the Book of Mormon and then ask God if it is true. And the promise is sure. They may know of its truthfulness through the Holy Ghost. And as a Book of Mormon prophet has declared, by the power of the Holy Ghost, men may know the truth of all things. We need the constant guidance of that Spirit. We live in an age of deceit. "O my people," said Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, "they who lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the way of thy paths." Even within the church, we have been warned that ravening wolves are amongst us from our own membership, and they more than any others are clothed in sheep's clothing because they wear the habiliments of the priesthood. The Lord holds us accountable as members of His church if we are not wise and are deceived. "For they that are wise," said the Lord, "and have received the truth, and have taken the Holy Spirit for their guide, and have not been deceived, verily I say unto you, they shall not be hewn down and cast into the fire, but shall abide the day." And so we may say there are four great civic standards for the faithful Latter-day Saints as follows. First, the Constitution ordained by God through wise men are the principles embodied therein. Second, the Scriptures, particularly the Book of Mormon. Third, the inspired counsel of the prophets, especially the living president. And fourth, the guidance of the Holy Spirit. God bless us all, that we may use these standards, and by so doing, bless ourselves, our families, our community, our nation, and the world. I humbly pray, as I bear my solemn witness to the truth of this great latter-day work, in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. May I first commend and express gratitude to these several hundred wonderful young people who rendered so beautifully these two great hymns of the Restoration. The prophet Ezekiel declared, Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word of my mouth, and give them warning from me. The inspired Book of Mormon prophet saw our day and warned us of the strategy of the adversary. Hear their words. For behold, at that day shall he, the devil, rage in the hearts of the children of men, and stir them up to anger against that which is good. And others will he pacify, and lull them away into carnal security. Woe be unto him that hearkeneth unto the precepts of men, and denieth the power of God. Through a modern prophet, Joseph Smith, the Lord has given this further warning. Wherefore the voice of the Lord is unto the ends of the earth, that all that will hear may hear. And the day cometh that they who will not hear the voice of the Lord, neither the voice of his servants, neither give heed to the words of the prophets and apostles, shall be cut off from among the people. For they have strayed from mine ordinances, and have broken mine everlasting covenant. They seek not the Lord to establish his righteousness, but every man walketh in his own way, and after the image of his own God, whose image is in the likeness of the world. And then further, what I, the Lord, have spoken, I have spoken, and I excuse not myself. And though the heavens and earth pass away, my word shall not pass away, but shall all be fulfilled. Whether by mine own voice or by the voice of my servants, it is the same. These latter warnings were given 140 years ago. The fulfillment is now. We are living witnesses unless we are blinded by our own complacency and the craftiness of evil men. As watchmen on the Tower of Zion, it is our obligation and right as leaders to speak out against current evils, evils that strike at the very foundation of all we hold dear as the true Church of Christ and as members of Christian nations. As one of these watchmen, with a love for humanity, I accept humbly this obligation and challenge, and gratefully strive to do my duty without fear. In times as serious as these, we must not permit fear of criticism to keep us from doing our duty, even at the risk of our counsel being tabbed as political, as government becomes more and more entwined in our daily lives. In the crisis through which we are now passing, we have been fully warned. This has brought forth some criticism. There are some of us who do not want to hear the message. It embarrasses us. The things which are threatening our lives, our welfare, our freedoms, are the very things some of us have been condoning. Many do not want to be disturbed as they continue to enjoy their comfortable complacency. The church is founded on eternal truth. We do not compromise principle. We do not surrender our standards regardless of current trends or pressures. Our allegiance to truth as a church is unwavering. Speaking out against immoral or unjust actions has been the burden of prophets and disciples of God from time immemorial. It was for this reason that many of them were persecuted. Nevertheless, it was their God-given task as watchmen on the tower to warn the people. We live in an age of appeasement, the sacrificing of principle. Appeasement is not the answer. It is never the right answer. A milk and water allegiance kills, while a passionate devotion gives life and soul to any cause and its adherents. The troubles of the world may largely be laid at the doors of those who are neither hot nor cold, who always follow the line of least resistance, whose timid hearts flutter at taking sides for truth. As in the great council in heavens, so in the Church of Christ on earth, there can be no neutrality. We are or we are not on the side of the Lord. An unrelenting faith, contemptuous of all compromise, will lead the church and every member of it to triumph and the achievement of our high destiny. The final conquerors of the world will be the men and women, few or many matters not, who fearlessly and unflinchingly cling to truth, and who are able to say no as well as yes, on whose lofty banner is inscribed, "No compromise with error." Tolerance is not conformity to the world's view and practices. We must not surrender our beliefs to get along with people, however beloved or influential they may be. Too high a price may be paid for social standing or even for harmony. The gospel rests upon eternal truth, and truth can never be deserted safely. It has been well said that our greatest national problem is erosion, not erosion of the soil, but erosion of the national morality. The United States of America has been great because it has been free. It has been free because it has trusted in God and was founded upon the principles of freedom set forth in the Word of God. This nation has a spiritual foundation. To me, this land has a prophetic history. In the year 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville, the famous French historian, came to our country at the request of the French government to study our penal institutions. He also made a close study of our political and social institutions. In less than 10 years, de Tocqueville had become world famous as the result of a 4-volume work which he wrote entitled Democracy in America. Here is his own stirring explanation of the greatness of America. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and he was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless prairies, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because she is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. How strong is our will to remain free, to be good? False thinking and false ideologies, dressed in the most pleasing forms, quietly, almost without our knowing it, seek to reduce our moral defenses and to captivate our minds. They entice with bright promises of security, cradle-to-the-grave guarantees of many kinds. They masquerade under various names, but all may be recognized by one thing they all have in common: to erode away character and man's freedom to think and act for himself. Effort will be made to lull us away into false security. Proposals will be and are being offered and programs sponsored that have wide appeal. Attractive labels are usually attached to the most dangerous programs, often in the name of public welfare and personal security. Again, let us not be misled. Freedom can be killed by neglect as well as by direct attack. Too long have too many of us, and people of the free world generally, stood by as silent accessories to the crimes of assault against freedom, assault against basic economic and spiritual principles and traditions which have made nations strong. Let us strive for progress down the road of goodness and freedom. With the help and blessings of God, the free people of the United States and the free world can and will face tomorrow without fear, without doubt, and with full confidence. We do not fear the phony population explosion, nor do we fear a shortage of food. If we can be free and good, the Lord has declared the earth is full, and there is enough and to spare. We can accept this promise with confidence. President Calvin Coolidge pinpointed the problem some years ago with these words: "We do not need more material development, we need more spiritual development. We do not need more intellectual power, we need more moral power. We do not need more knowledge, we need more character. We do not need more government, we need more culture. We do not need more law, we need more religion. We do not need more of the things that are seen, We need more of the things that are unseen. It is on that side of life that it is desirable to put the emphasis at the present time. If that side is strengthened, the other side will take care of itself. It is that side which is the foundation of all else. If the foundation be firm, the superstructure will stand. As a free people, we're following very closely, in many respects, the pattern which led to the downfall of the great Roman Empire. A group of well-known historians has summarized those conditions leading to the downfall of Rome in these words. Rome had known a pioneer beginning, not unlike our own pioneer heritage, and then entered into 2 centuries of greatness, reaching its pinnacle in the second of those centuries, going into the decline and collapse in the third. Yet the sins of decay were becoming apparent in the latter years of the second century. It is written that there were vast increases in the number of the idle rich and the idle poor. The latter, the idle poor, were put on a permanent dole, a welfare system not unlike our own. And as this system became permanent, the recipients of public welfare increased in number. They organized into a political bloc with sizable power. They were not hesitant about making their demands known, nor was the government hesitant about agreeing to their demands, and with ever-increasing frequency. Would-be emperors catered to them. The great solid middle class, Rome's strength then as ours is today, was taxed more and more to support a bureaucracy that kept growing larger and even more powerful. Surtaxes were imposed upon incomes to meet emergencies. The government engaged in deficit spending. The denarius, a silver coin similar to our half-dollar, began to lose its silvery hue. It took on a copper color as the government reduced the silver content. Even then, Gresham's law was at work because the real silver coin soon disappeared. It went into hiding. Military service was an obligation highly honored by the Romans. Indeed, a foreigner could win Roman citizenship simply by volunteering for service in the legions of Rome. But with increasing affluence and opulence, the young men of Rome began avoiding this service, finding excuses to remain in the soft and sordid life of the city. They took to using cosmetics and wearing feminine-like hairdos and garments, until it became difficult, the historians tell us, to tell the sexes apart. Among the teachers and scholars was a group called the Cynics, whose number let their hair and beards grow, and who wore slovenly clothes, and professed indifference to worldly goods, as they heaped scorn on what they called middle-class values. The morals declined. It became unsafe to walk in the countryside or the city streets. Rioting was commonplace, and sometimes whole sections of towns and cities were burned. And all the time, the twin diseases of confiscatory taxation and creeping inflation were waiting to deliver the death blow. And then finally, all these forces overcame the energy and ambition of the middle class. Rome fell. We are now approaching the end of our second century. In 1787, Edward Gibbon completed his noble work, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Here is the way he accounted for the fall. First, the undermining of the dignity and sanctity of the home, which is the basis of human society. Higher and higher taxes and spending of public monies for free bread and circuses for the populace. The mad craze for pleasure, sports becoming every year more and more exciting and brutal. The building of gigantic armaments, when the real enemy was within the decadence of the people. The decay of religion, faith fading into mere form, losing touch with life and becoming impotent to warn and guide the people. Is there a parallel for us in America today? Could the same reasons that destroyed Rome destroy America and possibly other countries of the free world? For 8 years in Washington, I had this prayerful statement on my desk. O God, give us men with a mandate higher than the ballot box. The lessons of history, many of them very sobering, ought to be turned to during this hour of our great achievements, because during the hour of our success is our greatest danger. Even during the hour of our great prosperity, a nation may sow the seeds of its own destruction. History reveals that rarely is a great civilization conquered from without unless it has weakened or destroyed itself within. The lessons of history stand as guideposts to help us safely chart the course for the future. As American citizens, as citizens of the free world, we need to rouse ourselves to the problems which confront us as great Christian nations. We must recognize that these fundamental basic principles, moral and spiritual, lay at the very foundation of our past achievements. To continue to enjoy present blessings, we must return to these basic and fundamental principles. Economics and morals are both part of one inseparable body of truth. They must be in harmony. We need to square our actions with these eternal verities. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints stands firm in support of great spiritual and moral principles which have been the basic traditions of the free world. We oppose every evil effort to downgrade or challenge the eternal verities which have undergirded civilization from the beginning. We will use every honorable means to strengthen the home and family, to encourage obedience to the first and great commandment, to multiply and replenish the earth through noble parenthood, and to strengthen character through adherence to high spiritual and moral principles. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, chastity will never be out of date. We have one standard for men and women, and that standard is moral purity. We oppose and abhor the damnable practice of wholesale abortion and every other unholy and impure act which strikes at the very foundation of the home and family, our most basic institutions. A continuation of these immoral practices will surely bring down the wrath and judgments of the Almighty. In our concentration upon materialism and material acquisitions, are we forgetting the spiritual basis upon which our prosperity, security, and freedom rest? God help us to repent of our evil ways and humble ourselves before the offended power. There is great safety in a nation on its knees. What assurance it would give of the much-needed blessings of the Lord if the American people and people everywhere could all be found daily, night and morning, on their knees, expressing gratitude for blessings already received, acknowledging our dependence upon God and seeking His divine guidance. The spectacle of a nation praying is more awe-inspiring, more powerful than the explosion of an atomic bomb. The force of prayer is greater than any possible combination of man-controlled powers, because prayer is man's greatest means of tapping the resources of God. The founding fathers accepted this eternal verity. Do we? Will we? Yes, it is in our own enlightened self-interest to engage in this simple practice, this powerful practice of prayer. Roger Babson said many years ago, what this country needs more than anything else is old-fashioned family prayer. Yes, our greatest need is a return to the old-fashioned, time-tested verities. God help us as free men to recognize the source of our blessings, the threat to our freedom and our moral and spiritual standards, and the need for humble yet courageous action to preserve these priceless, time-tested blessings, I humbly pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
President Benson has felt that he would rather have this read than to read it. We're grateful for his presence. He honors us. We love him as we know he loves us. I shall now read the message which he has prepared for the opening of this conference. My beloved brethren and sisters, I rejoice to be with you in another glorious general conference of the church. How grateful I am for the love, prayers, and service of the devoted members of the church throughout the world. May I commend you, faithful saints, who are striving to flood the earth and your lives with the Book of Mormon. Not only must we move forward in a monumental manner more copies of the Book of Mormon, but we must move boldly forward into our own lives and throughout the earth more of its marvelous messages. This sacred volume was written for us, for our day. Its scriptures are to be likened unto ourselves. The Doctrine and Covenants tells us that the Book of Mormon is the record of a fallen people. Why did they fall? This is one of the major messages of the Book of Mormon. Mormon gives the answer in the closing chapters of the book in these words: Behold, the pride of this nation, or the people of the Nephites, hath proven their destruction. And then, lest we miss that momentous Book of Mormon message from that fallen people, the Lord warns us in the Doctrine and Covenants, beware of pride, lest ye become as the Nephites of old. I earnestly seek an interest in your faith and prayers as I strive to bring forth light on this Book of Mormon message, the sin of pride. This message has been weighing heavily on my soul for some time. I know the Lord wants this message delivered now. In the premortal council, it was pride that felled Lucifer, the son of the morning. At the end of this world, when God cleanses the earth by fire, the proud will be burned to stubble, and the meek shall inherit the earth. 3 times in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord uses the phrase, beware of pride, including a warning to the second elder of the church, Oliver Cowdery, and to Emma Smith, the wife of the prophet. Pride is a very misunderstood sin, and many are sinning in ignorance. In the Scriptures, there is no such thing as righteous pride. It is always considered a sin. Therefore, no matter how the world uses the term, we must understand how God uses the term, so we can understand the language of Holy Writ and profit thereby. Most of us think of pride as self-centeredness, conceit, boastfulness, arrogance, or haughtiness. All of these are elements of the sin, but the heart or core is still missing. The central feature of pride is enmity. Enmity toward God and enmity toward our fellow men. Enmity means hatred toward, hostility to, or a state of opposition. It is the power by which Satan wishes to reign over us. Pride is essentially competitive in nature. We pit our will against God's. When we direct our pride toward God, it is in the spirit of my will and not thine be done. As Paul said, they seek their own, not the things which are Jesus Christ's. Our will in competition to God's will allows desires, appetites, and passions to go unbridled. The proud cannot accept the authority of God giving direction to their lives. They pit their perceptions of truth against God's great knowledge, their abilities versus God's priesthood power, their accomplishments against His mighty works. Our enmity toward God takes on many labels, such as rebellion, hard-heartedness, stiff-neckedness, unrepentant, puffed up, easily offended, and sign-seekers. The proud wish God would agree with them. They aren't interested in changing their opinions to agree with God. Another major portion of this very prevalent sin of pride is enmity toward our fellow men. We are tempted daily to elevate ourselves above others and diminish them. The proud make every man their adversary by pitting their intellects, opinions, works, wealth, talents, or any other worldly measuring device against others. In the words of C.S. Lewis, pride gets no pleasure out of having something, only out of having more of it than the next man. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. Once the element of competition is gone, pride has gone. In the pre-earthly council, Lucifer placed his proposal in competition with the Father's plan as advocated by Jesus. He wished to be honored above all others. In short, his prideful desire was to dethrone God. The Scriptures abound with evidence of the severe consequences of the sin of pride to individuals, groups, cities, and nations. Pride goeth before destruction. It destroyed the Nephite nation and the city of Sodom. It was through pride that Christ was crucified. The Pharisees were wroth because Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, which was a threat to their position, and so they plotted his death. Saul became an enemy to David through pride. He was jealous because the crowds of Israelite women were singing that Saul hath slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. The proud stand more in fear of men's judgments than of God's judgments. What will men think of me weighs heavier than what will God think of me. King Noah was about to free the prophet Abinadi, but an appeal to his pride by his wicked priests sent Abinadi to the flames. Herod sorrowed at the request of his wife to behead John the Baptist, but his prideful desire to look good to them that sat with him at meat caused him to kill John. Fear of God's judgment manifests itself in competition for men's approval. The proud love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Our motives for the things we do are where the sin is manifest. Jesus said he did always those things that pleased God. Would we not do well to have the pleasing of God as our motive, rather than to try to elevate ourselves above our brother and outdo another? Some prideful people are not so concerned as to whether their wages meet their needs as they are that their wages are more than someone else's. Their reward is being a cut above the rest. This is the enmity of pride. When pride has a hold on our hearts, we lose our independence of the world and deliver our freedoms to the bondage of men's judgment. The world shouts louder than the whisperings of the Holy Ghost. The reasoning of men overrides the revelations of God, and the proud let go of the iron rod. Pride is a sin that can readily be seen in others, but is rarely admitted in ourselves. Most of us consider pride to be a sin of those on the top, such as the rich and the learned, looking down at the rest of us. There is, however, a far more common ailment among us, and that is pride from the bottom looking up. It is manifest in so many ways, such as fault-finding, gossiping, backbiting, murmuring, living beyond our means, envying, coveting, withholding gratitude and praise that might lift another, and being unforgiving and jealous. Disobedience is essentially a prideful power struggle against someone in authority over us. It can be a parent, a priesthood leader, a teacher, or ultimately God. A proud person hates the fact that someone is above him. He thinks this lowers his position. Selfishness is one of the more common faces of pride. How everything affects me is the center of all that matters. Self-conceit, self-pity, worldly self-fulfillment, self-gratification, and self-seeking. Pride results in secret combinations which are built up to get power, gain, and glory of the world. This fruit of the sin of pride, namely secret combinations, brought down both the Jaredite and Nephite civilizations, and has been and will yet be the cause of the fall of many nations. Another face of pride is contention. Arguments, fights, unrighteous dominion, generation gaps, divorces, spouse abuse, riots and disturbance, all fall into this category of pride. Contention in our families drives the Spirit of the Lord away. It also drives many of our family members away. Contention ranges from a hostile spoken word to worldwide conflicts. The Scriptures tell us that only by pride cometh contention. The Scriptures testify that the proud are easily offended and hold grudges. They withhold forgiveness to keep another in their debt and to justify their injured feelings. The proud do not receive counsel or correction easily. Defensiveness is used by them to justify and rationalize their frailties and failures. The proud depend upon the world to tell them whether they have value or not. Their self-esteem is determined by where they are judged to be on the ladders of worldly success. They feel worthwhile as individuals if the numbers beneath them in achievement, talent, beauty, or intellect are large enough. Pride is ugly. It says, if you succeed, I am a failure. If we love God, do His will, and fear His judgments more than men's, we will have self-esteem. Pride is a damning sin in the true sense of that word. It limits or stops progression. The proud are not easily taught. They won't change their minds to accept truths because it implies they have been wrong. Pride adversely affects all our relationships. Our relationship with God and His servants, between husband and wife, parent and child, employer and employee, teacher and student, and all mankind. Our degree of pride determines how we treat our God and our brothers and sisters. Christ wants us to lift up where he is, do we desire to do the same for others? Pride fades our feelings of sonship to God and brotherhood to man. It separates and divides us by ranks according to our riches and our chances for learning. Unity is impossible for a proud people, and unless we are one, we are not the Lord's. Think of what pride has cost us in the past and what it is now costing us in our own lives, our families, and the church. Think of the repentance that could take place with lives changed, marriages preserved, and homes strengthened if pride did not keep us from confessing our sins and forsaking them. Think of the many who are less active members of the church because they were offended and their pride will not allow them to forgive or fully sup at the Lord's table. Think of the tens of thousands of additional young men and couples who could be on missions except for the pride that keeps them from yielding their hearts unto God. Think how temple work would increase if the time spent in this godly service were more important than the many prideful pursuits that compete for our time. Pride affects all of us at various times, in various degrees. Now you can see why the building in Lehi's dream that represents the pride of the world was large and spacious, and great was the multitude that did enter into it. Pride is the universal sin, the great vice. Yes, pride is the universal sin, the great vice. The antidote for pride is humility, meekness, submissiveness. It is the broken heart and contrite spirit. As Rudyard Kipling put it so well, the tumult and the shouting dies. The captains and the kings depart. Still stands thine ancient sacrifice, an humble and a contrite heart. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. God will have a humble people. We can either choose to be humble or we can be compelled to be humble. Alma said, "Blessed are they who humble themselves without being compelled to be humble." Let us choose to be humble. We can choose to humble ourselves by conquering enmity toward our brothers and sisters, esteeming them as ourselves, and lifting them as high or higher than we are. We can choose to humble ourselves by receiving counsel and chastisement. We can choose to humble ourselves by forgiving those who have offended us. We can choose to humble ourselves by rendering selfless service. We can choose to humble ourselves by going on mission and preaching the word that can humble others. We can choose to humble ourselves by getting to the temple more frequently. We can choose to humble ourselves by confessing and forsaking our sins and being born of God. We can choose to humble ourselves by loving God, submitting our will to His, and putting Him first in our lives. Let us choose to be humble. We can do it. I know we can. My dear brethren and sisters, we must prepare to redeem Zion. It was essentially the sin of pride that kept us from establishing Zion in the days of the prophet Joseph Smith. It was the same sin of pride that brought consecration to an end among the Nephites. Pride is the great stumbling block of Zion. I repeat, pride is the great stumbling block of Zion. We must cleanse the inner vessel by conquering pride. We must yield to the enticings of the Holy Spirit, put off the prideful natural man, become a saint through the atonement of Christ the Lord, and become as a child, submissive, meek, humble, that we may do so and go on to fulfill our divine destiny, is my fervent prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
My beloved brothers and sisters, my heart is full and my feelings tender as we conclude this great General Conference of the Church. I have a desire to speak on missionary work, but I'll refrain. We have been richly blessed as we have listened to the counsel of our brethren, the testimonies of which have been spoken. As a special witness of Jesus Christ and as his humble servant, it is now my privilege, as the Spirit dictates, to bear pure testimony and witness to that which I know to be true. This I will do. I testify that we are the spirit offspring of a loving God, our Heavenly Father. He has a great plan of salvation whereby his children might be perfected and he might enjoy a fullness of I testify that in our premortal state, our elder brother in the Spirit, even Jesus Christ, our foreordained Savior, in the plan of salvation, he is the captain of our salvation and the only means through whom we can return to our Father in heaven to gain the fullness of joy. I testify that Lucifer was also in the council of heaven. He sought to destroy the agency of man. He rebelled. There was war in heaven, and a third of the hosts were cast to the earth and denied a body. Lucifer is the enemy of all righteousness and seeks the misery of all mankind. I testify that all those who come into mortality, our Father's plan, have proved faithful in their first estate in heaven. They are now subject to the test in this second estate. We test entails further testimony that the Lord requires. Those who prove faithful in this second estate will have glory added upon their heads forever and ever. I testify that God reveals His will to men through the light of Christ. They receive the additional light of the gift of the Holy Ghost through the laying on of hands by God's authorized servants following baptism. I testify that throughout the ages, the spoken God has spoken to His children through His prophets. Only when there is children rejected, the prophets were prophets taken out of their midst, and then tragedy followed. I testify that Christ was born into mortality with Mary as His mother and our Father as His Father. He lived a sinless life, providing us a perfect example. He worked out the great atonement which through His grace has provided for every soul a resurrection, for the faithful the means to exalt mankind. I testify that during His mortal ministry, Christ established His church on the earth. He called and ordained men to be apostles and prophets with authority so that what they bound on earth would be bound in heaven. They received revelation, which provided new scripture. I testify that a world so wicked that it killed the Son of God soon began killing the apostles and prophets, and soon plunged the self into the dark age. Scripture ended, apostasy spread, and the church that Christ established during His earthly ministry ceased to exist. I testify that the God of heaven and His Son, Jesus Christ, appeared to Joseph Smith in the spring of 1820, thus bringing to an end the long night of apostasy. To Joseph appeared other beings, including John the Baptist and Peter, James, and John, who ordained him with authority to act in the name of God. the church and kingdom of God was restored in these latter days, even the church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with all the gifts, rights, powers, doctrines, offices, and blessings of the former day church. I testify that through the Book of Mormon, God has provided for our day tangible evidence that Jesus is the Christ and Joseph Smith is his prophet. This other testament of Jesus Christ is a scriptural account of the inhabitants of America. I translated by Joseph Smith, through the gift and power of God, those who will read and ponder the Book of Mormon and ask our eternal Father in the name of Christ if it is true, may know for themselves of its truthfulness through the power of the Holy Ghost, provided they will ask with a sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ. I testify that America is a choice land. God raised up the founding fathers of the United States of America and established the inspired Constitution. I can't turn the page over. This was the required prologue for the restoration of the gospel. America will be a blessed land unto the righteous forever, and is the base from which God will continue to direct the worldwide Latter-day Saint operation of his kingdom. I testify that there has been, and there is now, and there will be legal successors to the prophet Joseph Smith, who hold the keys of the kingdom of God on the earth, even the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He received revelation from God to direct his kingdom. Associated with him are others who are prophets, seers, and revelators, even those who make up the presiding quorums of the church, namely the First Presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles. I testify that wickedness is rapidly expanding in every phase of our society. It is more highly organized, more cleverly disguised, and more powerfully presented. Secret combinations, lusting for power, gain, and glory are flourishing. A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing in the evil influence and control over America and the entire world. I testify that the church and kingdom of God is increasing in strength. Its numbers are growing as its faithfulness of its members. It has never been better organized or equipped to perform its divine mission. I testify that as the forces of evil increase under Lucifer's leadership, and as the good increase under the leadership of Jesus Christ, there will be growing battles between the two until the final confirmation. As the issue becomes clear and more obvious, all mankind will eventually be required to align themselves either with the kingdom of God or the devil. All these conflicts rage either secretly or openly. The righteous will be tested. God's wrath will soon shake the nations of the earth and will be poured out on the wicked without measure. But God will provide strength for the righteous and the means of escape, and eventually and finally truth will prevail. I testify that it is time for every man to set in order his own house, but temporarily, both temporarily and spiritually. It is time for the unbeliever to learn for himself that this work is true, that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the kingdom which Daniel prophesied God would set up on the latter day, never to be destroyed, a stone that would eventually fill the whole earth and stand forever. It is time for us as members of the church to walk in all the ways of the Lord, to use our influence to make popular that which is sound and good, and to make unpopular that which is unsound. We have the scriptures, the prophets, and the gift of the Holy Ghost. Now we need eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts that will hearken to God's direction. I testify that not many years hence the earth will be cleansed. Jesus the Christ will come again, this time in power and great glory, and vanquish his foes, and to the rule and reign on earth. In due time, all men will be resurrected, and then will face the Master in final judgment. God will give rewards to each according to the deeds done in the flesh. I testify to you that the fullness of joy can only come through the atonement of Jesus Christ, and by obedience to all the laws, ordinances, and gospel which are only in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To all these things I humbly testify and bear my solemn witness, and that they are true. And I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.